and lose badly, and just sort of allowed him there so they could have, you know, the pretense of a democratic choice. Given the current makeup of the Guardian Council, Ahmed Jannati has been there for 30 years, 32 years, for the entire length of the Islamic Republic. This horrible old man has been there. He wasn't a horrible old man when he started, I guess, but he is now. He gave a sermon the other week where he called upon the Shia of Bahrain to fight until they die or win. I thought that was very charming. How can you possibly get anywhere with a system where you have the same guy in charge of the vetting for all these years? I just don't see it.
Just had a question about
The question was about the ethnic in the country, and what adjustments you could make to take those into account, and to sort of take that control from the regime so that it can't use those splits as a way to further tension.
I didn't investigate this particular issue at length, but given that Iran is an ethnically diverse country, it makes much more sense to have a proportional representation system where they can be part of it. I don't think the regime has ever used this as an excuse. I think at the beginning of the revolution, there were talks between proportional representation versus a majority system, and the regime said no. The Revolutionary Council, leading members of the Islamic Republic, said no to the proportional representation option because they wanted to consolidate their power. Now, in terms of the future and electoral reform, I'll pass that on to Andy. I mean, I guess Iraq is a good example.
Well, I suppose, it's a very important question. I know you deal with this every day, but it seems to me that the first premise to step back and think about, do those every society is ethnically diverse to some degree, almost every society. Do those ethnic differences, are they polarized? Are they made salient in politics? I mean, if ethnicity in the Iranian case was not a fault line of division, then it probably would be counterproductive to recognize and segment and divide along those lines. I mean, reserving seats for the minorities or creating election systems that would reassure and include those minorities, that they were winning seats as Zoroastrian or whoever they may be, would probably be counterproductive. I mean, we've seen, say in the Bosnian case, I mean, the quite valid recognition of Bosniak, Serb and Croat has now reached a situation where you've just segmented politics about being ethnic politics in perpetuity for all time, because you have no space for new alliances and multi-ethnic forms of politics to form. That being said, if in the Iranian case there is now all the potential for those ethnic divisions to become more tense and polarized and dangerous, then at the end of the day, I think good governance and good election system design would be, as Yasmin said, to try and make sure you have a system that includes minority communities however they wish to vote. If Baluchis wish to vote together, and they do largely vote together, and they're regionally concentrated, then a system that gives them adequate voice in national and local government is probably crucial. I mean, we cannot imagine an Iraqi system where there is not significant minority representation at the regional level, and then sort of Sunni, Shia, and Kurdish representation at the national level, as being a foundational body that can work out some of these deals. And so, I don't know the details of Iran now and in the future, but it seems to me that any election system, perhaps a degree of proportionality in some type of hybrid system, which provides that space for the minority communities to win seats if they wish to do so. I mean, that's the principle of the 1965 Voting Rights Act here in the United States. If a community of color votes together and wishes to elect candidates of color, then the system is gerrymandered, is rigged to provide that opportunity to do so. That's a minority-majority district in the US, and the same principle could be applied in Iran, but I wouldn't do it that way. I'd probably do it a slightly different way.
Okay, we have time for one, possibly two questions if they're short. Back. The question was about election management versus the electoral system, and specifically, does the entire system need to be set aside, or could you set up an independent body that would be able to do I guess, a good enough job?
Okay. I would say that we don't need to discount the entire system. I think that if the political will existed for reform, and the Guardian Council and its vetting rights, its policy rights were taken away and given to an independent election commission, maybe same 12-member body, but they're independents, they're lawyers, they're people who are familiar with constitutional law, part of that body supervising the elections and then leaving the administration, which is really not a big deal in Iran, to the Ministry of Interior. I think we could ultimately come out with results that were favorable. But as it stands now, with the Guardian Council controlling elections and using it essentially as an exclusionary mechanism, I don't think that we can move forward with this system. But we don't need to discard everything.
In 2009, there were representatives of the major candidates in the polling stations, but nobody ever consulted them on whether the election was free or fair. And the ballots were supposed to be counted in the individual polling stations. They weren't. They were all taken to Tehran, and then this phony figure was put forward. So, if they had actually followed their own procedures, it might have worked.
Yeah, no, just very briefly, I mean, Michael, you know this better than I think all of us on the panel, but it seems to me that the reality of independent and successful commissions is that they, in many cases, can be housed almost anywhere. They can be independent, or they can be within a Home Affairs or an Interior Department, and the de jure setup matters, but what perhaps matters even more is the de facto practice of that commission, and the people and the way they work, and the ability of that commission to set themselves aside from the government of the day and actually be recognized as legitimate managers who are above politics. And I wonder whether the Iranian case is one where, well, it could be. One scenario is that because of the past, you just have to totally take out the management structures from the government and make them independent with all the bells and whistles that requires. The other option that Yasmin mentioned is perhaps just trying to reform what's currently there, because there are probably many, many good bureaucrats and independent and neutral bureaucrats who are running elections, but their voices have been submerged under a broader state edict. So I wonder if you might be able to just transform at the top levels the level of administration and bring in people who are more independent and more respected by the opposition. Even the sort of party model about opposition and governing parties coming in and checking the work of the commission, which may be as successful. It's really, the proof is in the pudding rather than what's on the paper.
Okay, and the final question in the back, please. Okay. First part of the question was that Yasmin, and I'm not sure you actually said this, but that elections showed that people were against the regime. So there was a question of what exactly is the regime, and she pointed out that there's no consensus on what the people actually wanted. And second was a follow-on to the last question, is whether people would be appeased with simply free and fair elections, or if you needed to turn over the whole system, I presume, to give it some sort of a historic legitimacy by taking that sort of step.
Let me clarify what I said. I said that the last 15 years have demonstrated that the population has been against, has sort of come out with a vote of no confidence for the establishment, not the regime. I'm not sure if people are against the regime. You yourself pointed out rightly that following the disputed elections, there were people who came out and said, I want my vote back. There were people who came out and said that I want Ahmadinejad gone. There were people who said, I want the supreme leader gone. And the slogan sort of changed as the movement changed from 2009 all the way to the 14th of February in 2011. So in order to decide what the population wants, I think there needs to be some sort of referendum, some sort of question as to what the people want. I don't know if that's ever going to happen with this regime right now, but I can't make the judgment call as to what is it that the people want. I know at the beginning they wanted their votes back. They wanted their votes to be counted. But at this point, it's a little bit more complicated than that.
Anyone else? Okay. Well, I'd like to thank you all for coming. We have Duality by Design available out here as well as on the website, and thank you.